Good morning. I'd also like to, on behalf of this panel, acknowledge country and the wonderful time we're going to have in front of us as we get underway with the convention and what that might mean to Australia. But I want to say this session, I am so looking forward to it because it's going to bring together some of the stuff that's most important to me. It's women, it's politics, and it's community. And one of the observations that I'm making is that in the olden days, it was the Labor Party traditionally represented Labor people, workers. The Liberal Party traditionally represented business and the more wealthy people. The Greens Party represented the environment. And there was no one to talk for community. And what I am seeing happening now in all its rich diversity is the voice of community is getting heard. And what I love about community is where policy hits the ground, when the silos are broken down, where government policy actually rubber hits the road. And if your community is not working, it makes it very hard. So and the other thing about community is that when I became a member of Parliament, it was my community holding me to account that made me such a better politician. Because they kept on demanding more of me, and they helped me not only find my voice and use it, but helped me understand what representation meant. So this morning, we've got these amazing politicians, and the focus is on community and how they see community in Parliament, and what they think it might mean for the nation to have voice of community in all its richness and diversity reflected in the national politics, because it hasn't been there in the past. So to open up, I'm asking each of the community independent members of Parliament to talk for about 5 minutes to introduce themselves to us and talk to us about what their understanding of community is and what it means for them to be a community independent. And in the process, tell us a little bit about their electorates. A lot of this was covered during their first speeches, but I suspect not many of us have had a chance to listen to the 6 amazing first speeches. So without any more conversation from me, Allegra, over to you. Really keen to hear from you and hear your version of community.
Thank you so much, Cathy. And I think the two things are, every time I listen to you, I take something away. And certainly two of the things that you just said, one is that no one has stood for community, that Labor has stood for the workers and Liberal has stood for business. No one has stood for community, I think is absolutely profound. And the other piece is about your community holding you to account, because that's exactly how I feel about Wentworth. And that's what I'm hoping Wentworth does. And I feel like Wentworth is already doing that in the few months that I have been elected. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about, I guess, sort of myself, the journey here, what I feel Wentworth is really standing for and asking for, and a bit about that community and what it means to be a community independent to me. So a bit about Wentworth, eastern suburbs of Sydney. I know we've got some Wentworthers on the line because Delia and Leisha, I think some Wentworth people. So those two people know exactly what standing for Wentworth is about. So we take in the beaches and the harbourside suburbs of Sydney in the eastern suburbs. People have a lot of assumptions about Wentworth, and I think a lot of people assume that Wentworth is universally wealthy and has universally shared views, and I think that's really interesting. Also not true. Wentworth, for example, if you really dig down into Wentworth, we are more female than male, and also than the country, 52% women. We are 62% people living in flats and apartments, which is significantly more than the nation. So it talks to the density of Wentworth. We have a big chunk of people basically from 25 to 49. So we've got a big community in that sort of early mid-age. And then but we are sort of very educated as a community. Pretty much, I think it's 47% of the community has a degree versus 22% of the country. So that's a sense of Wentworth. People work I was just looking up the top jobs in Wentworth, and interestingly, it's law, banking, but then it's cafes and hospitality, then it's hospitals and IT. So I think that actually talks to the diversity of Wentworth, because again, while Wentworth has a perception of being a sort of monolithic or single community, there is a lot of variation there. There's a lot of variation of life, wealth, and experience there. And I think that's, as a community independent, you need to speak, you really need to stand for them. Now, I guess probably my first piece as a community independent with how I think about it is, I don't stand for those who elected me. I stand for the whole of Wentworth. And I need to be really clear that my responsibility is to the whole of the community. When people ask me to describe Wentworth, I say, we are, actually use an example of a person who told this to me, and I think he put it best. He was Sean. I met him on Bondi when I was out there electioneering, and he said to me, and he was pushing his daughter on a tricycle, and he said, look, I stand, I care about the environment. It's why I live in such a beautiful place. He said, I want us to be a kind society. I think that's really important. And he said, and I'm a small business owner, and that is absolutely vitally important to me. And I really try and keep those things in mind when I think about Wentworth, because I think that we are environmentally focused, obviously, in our action on climate change, but people talk a lot about wanting a kind and decent society and wanting that represented by their community. And finally, but there's very business focused electorate as well. So I need to continue to reflect those. In terms of what Wentworth, is standing and asking from a community independent. Look, I think it's worth noting that I'm not the first independent or the first community independent in Wentworth. Karen Phelps actually held Wentworth for 9 months, it just briefly between the by-election and the election, and, was very, very close to holding it. In the next seat. And I think the starkest example, I think, of the difference between a community independent and a party operative is that Karen Phelps championed and got passed the legislation to get critically ill asylum seekers off Nauru and Manus. And it was one of the first votes that Dave Sharma, her Liberal representative, did, was to vote that out. And when I say, well, what does Wentworth stand for? Wentworth absolutely stands for refugee rights. We're a lot of people who are from refugee or migrant backgrounds, and so I think that's the real disconnect, I think, between big parties versus a community local independent. I'm just going to say one more. I'll jump for the last piece, is really in terms of, and I will probably touch on this afterwards, but for me, it isn't going to be an experiment and iteration about how to make sure that the community really lives in what I do as an independent. What I was saying to someone yesterday, and I think it's my approach, which is it's national policy, but local action. And my goal is that that both my votes reflect my community, but also, the votes actually reflect the action of what's going on in the country also gets played out in that local community. And it's really the idea of having that sort of flow between the parliament and the electorate is absolutely crucial, as well as the action that we take on the ground, which is going to be really important to me.
Great. Well, that's set the scene, Allegra. Thank you. So Zoe in Melbourne, Zoe on the beach in Goldstein. What do you reckon about community? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you represent.
Hi, Cathy, and hi, everyone. It's wonderful of all of you to be on a Sunday morning. And look, I will say that I'm on the Bunurong country here of the Kulin Nation, and I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. And I'll also begin by saying thank you to Cathy, who has been a big motivation for me. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just make that little link that Cathy, myself and Jill Briggs were together on a study tour of the United States back in the mid-90s. So something came full circle, I think, when Cathy sent me a note a few months ago saying that perhaps I should consider standing as a community independent after a group of women took a bus tour around the US 25 years ago, and then now I find myself sitting here talking to you. So it is nice to see that circle completed. Goldstein is a not dissimilar to Wentworth in some ways, in that it is a wealthy electorate and a highly educated electorate in parts. For those of you who haven't been here, we have the Bayside suburbs of Melbourne, which are on one side of the Nepean Highway, and then the electorate spreads across into areas like Bentley and Cheltenham and Ormond and McKinnon, and those areas are a little different, and made up in large part now by young families, people who have moved nearer to the bay in Melbourne for the open spaces and the schools and all the sorts of things that this electorate offers. I think that what was happening here that motivated people to drift in my direction was that there was a sense of not being represented by those who had been representing the electorate of Goldstein since Federation, a sense of being taken for granted. And as you said, Cathy, that sense of lack of community representation and sort of being stuck with an ideology that didn't actually represent the values of the community anymore within the parliament. So what I tried to do during my campaign, and I think the whole modus operandi now as an elected representative, is to deliver that direct representation and that really authentic community engagement that people have really felt that they've been missing. There has been such a deep sense, I think, of frustration and disappointment in the direction that our politics has taken. And that's not party political. I think no matter whether you might have previously been a Labor voter or a coalition voter, there is that deep sense of frustration of not really being genuinely represented and fundamentally not being listened to. A sense that you can sort of think whatever you want to think and yell at the television, but it's not going to make any difference in terms of the way that that translates to what happens in the parliament. The thing that happened, I think, during this particular election campaign, and obviously it's really surfing off the momentum that Cathy, you built, and also Helen and Zali, that sort of delivered all of us into the parliament this time, was a realization among people that that kind of direct representation could be achieved. And there was this building movement that happened. I mean, I don't know about the others, but when I was initially asked to run as a community independent, my first response was absolutely no chance in hell, I'm not doing that. But once I started thinking about it, I was sort of struck myself by the realization that there was actually an opportunity to step in without having to take a side and to just genuinely represent community, to listen to people, to really engage properly and sincerely, and then to take those views forward. And I think what we saw during the election campaign and since the election is that penny dropped for so many people that we saw this wave develop, and it almost just overtook itself. That at the beginning it was like, can we actually do this? Is this achievable? Okay, let's jump in, let's give it a try. And then a lot of people did the same thing. So we saw that sort of zeitgeist develop to the extent that I think after the election was called, we had a sort of second campaign launched down by the bay here in Sandringham, and we had sort of 1,500 to 2,000 people turn up on a Saturday morning to attend a political event, a launch, which was, I mean, Barry Jones was there, the former Labor minister, and he said, I've just never seen anything like this in my life. And that was not me, that was the community movement that built around me and that built our campaign up into something that delivered a community representative into the parliament for an electorate that would never have previously gone anywhere near that kind of politics. So I just think there are so many intersecting pieces that have come together to put us where we are now on the crossbench, and we continue to just have this huge opportunity around how we continue to have that genuine interaction with community, to take those positions and priorities to Canberra. And I'll just finish by saying that there was a couple of months of pretty sort of ridiculous logistics trying to stand up an office and staff an office and all those sorts of things after the election. And it was a little bit discombobulating in a way. But then, having been in Canberra these last couple of weeks, I think that those jigsaw puzzle pieces really started to come together for me to say, I'm in and of my community, and I interact genuinely with my community, and then I can take those things to Canberra and really advocate on those things and change things. And what actually happened in this 2 weeks in Canberra, and long may it continue, is that we were able to have those genuine interactions with ministers and members of the government to actually, as Kate Chaney said in her speech, nudge things forward, or nudge things in the direction that our communities want to see things go. And that's hugely exciting.
And I want to pick that up, but I just love that phrase, Zoe, in and of our community. And it's such a safe place to be as opposed to other places. Okay, so let's hear from you, Kylea, Tink. And I have to say, I'm really was part of your saw your electorate yesterday as I drove into Sydney and remembered some of the campaigning we did, and really looking forward to your story about your electorate and why you chose to be a community independent.
Thanks, Cathy. And again, just to echo what has been said by other speakers this morning, it is so incredibly exciting to see so many people on this forum today, because I think, the reality is there's no me without the we of North Sydney. And I guess, the truth is that in many of the seats that we're here representing today, if these seats can be turned to independent, the truth of it is that no seat is safe. And I think that's what we saw at the end of after May 21st, when we all woke up on May 22nd. And I think the whole country was a little bit going, what just happened? And how did these women get into the House? I confess, I'm going to start from the other end of the story. I've just spent the 2 weeks in Canberra and had the most incredible time. And I've got to say, it was the biggest honour of my life to be able to sit in rooms speaking with ministers and committees and advisors about where our country is heading on all sorts of policy areas, from paid domestic violence leave to treatment of asylum seekers in immigration centres to the environment policy. And at every point in the time, I just felt there was nowhere else in the world I wanted to be. And I felt this incredible sense that it was North Sydney's voice that I was delivering in those meetings. It wasn't my voice. I was, in every opportunity, I reflected on what I'd heard from my community before I was sent to Canberra. And in fact, you saw that when it came to voting in the House. On a couple of occasions, there were votes put forward, and I actually stopped and listened to my heart and went, where would my community want me sitting right now? And then I sat where I thought my community would want me to sit. So for me, having had that experience now is incredibly affirming, because if I go back right to the beginning, and I've reflected a lot on this, much like everybody else, I was found. I didn't step forward and offer myself up as a candidate. And in fact, the first time a friend called me to say she wanted to put my name forward, I laughed. I sincerely thought she was joking. But I did say that I was happy to have a conversation with the group that was doing it, because I thought I might be able to help find the person who would be the right person to put forward. I come from a rural and regional background in northwest New South Wales, a place called Coonabarabran. So I think for me, community is just, it is, that's nothing gets done unless a community steps forward to make it so in a place like Coonabarabran, whether it's tennis courts, basketball courts, schools, you name it, the community needs to pull together to make that happen. And in many ways, people might say that Coonabarabran is a world apart from North Sydney, but it's not at all. And what I think happened here in North Sydney is particularly interesting, because it was a true three-way race. So we had, a strong Liberal incumbent. North Sydney was one of the first seats ever created after Federation. So we've been around since 1900. And for all but 6 of those years, we've been held by someone who represented the Liberal Party values. So at the same time in this last election, though, Labor ran a really strong candidate, a female candidate, very forward-focused, socially progressive. And then there was me in the independent space. So I offer that because I think it's important to know I didn't say yes to running because I thought we'd win. That wasn't the push for me to get involved in this movement. I said yes to running because I sincerely believed we could only benefit from having a different conversation around politics in my community. And the reason that different conversation was so important is that we were a community that, despite all the probably assumptions about what North Sydney is, we were being treated like an also-ran. Our voice did not matter. We had a very nice federal rep, a guy who, when you talked to him, talked in a way that you wanted to believe, was representative of our community. But when he went to Canberra and you looked at his voting record, and I think this is the thing that really struck me, his voting record was identical, almost without exception, to somebody like Barnaby Joyce. Our local member was voting against faster action on climate.
I'm going to cut you off there, because we'll go down that track. Anything else about community you want to say?
Just that I think it's really important that you, from my perspective, much like Allegra said, my community is stereotyped, and it's actually, it isn't what the parties wanted to portray it as in Canberra. So, I think what's really important for me is making sure that every time I do speak, I'm speaking from that community place.
Yeah, great. We'll pick up a bit more of that, but I love that thread of the stereotyping that happens when you've got the parties doing it, which is really clearly, obviously. Now, Dr. Sophie is going to be followed by Dr. Ryan, and it just gives me so much pleasure to have your perspectives on community, because it will be different to the others, I think. So, Dr. Sophie, tell us why you stood as a community independent, and what does it mean for you?
Oh, Cathy, thank you. And thank you everyone for organising today. I think Cathy knows she played a very big role in my stand. I blame her entirely. All this talk about flex your courage muscle, if not you, then who? There's no cavalry coming, there's only us. Cathy. And also, I should say, at the same time, while we're mentioning that, is the Women for Election, and also Kate Bura and Fiona Pearman, who were with Core Confidence as well. That whole narrative around facing your fear and stepping up. So it was incredible. But I'll just say quickly, I'm from Kylea, which is the northern beaches of Sydney, next door to Warringah and Zali. So we were very lucky to have Zali as an exemplar of what could happen for community. We also have a great diversity. I think, we have pockets of extreme wealth, but also pockets of areas where people are really struggling. And also there is a diversity in ethnicity as well. We have the largest Tibetan community in Australia. So very proud. But and also we had that very long history of voting. We've voted Liberal for the last 73 years since the seat was established. But what we found was McGowan no longer fitted into that dichotomy or that trichotomy of the two or three parties. We'd never been Liberal, would never be Green, but people just felt that they were no longer represented by the Liberal Party, that they had lost their way and no longer represented their voice or their values. So what was left? And so people really were left reeling and were really cut off from their democracy and their politics, because they, like Zoe and everyone's been saying, everyone just said, well, we're not being heard. We're being taken for granted. No one's listening. We don't even really know who our representative is. What's the point in engaging? And so that whole starting with listening, the power that we found that comes from listening was just extraordinary. And I just love that this model of the kitchen table conversation came from, a regional area, Indi, where we're a very strong community, just sat around the kitchen table. I just love it. And we found it was so powerful ourselves, because unlike the others, I was actually part of the, building the community. That started because there came a point for me, I should say, where it became very obvious that we were not being listened to and we would not be listened to. So we, at the end of the Black Summer bushfires, so there's still smoke in the air, we, every home in Kylea was letterboxed a survey from our then representative. And on that was a list of about 20 things, tick the box of what issues are important to you. And climate change did not appear on that list. And so people were just aghast. That was how stark it was that we were not being listened to. So our feeling was that if we did want to be represented, then it has to start with listening, absolutely has to start with listening. And as a GP, I know that as well as a doctor, you absolutely have to sit and listen. It's 90% of the diagnosis. You can't get it right and you cannot represent unless you listen. And so we started holding those kitchen table conversations with a number of others that came together. And we just found it was the most powerful thing. People who, you know, were finally given the right to talk about what was important to them, and people just became exhilarated and activated. And part of it was asking for solutions, and the solutions that people were coming up with was, well, we need an independent. Where is this independent that we need to support? Like, oh, we better start that up too. And why? So why do we need to rely on community? Well, community is it, right? It's all starts and ends with community. They're the heart and soul. And I would just say that the passion that came through with our volunteers and our community was incredible. The passion and the commitment was unbelievable. People would say to me, you're not getting the same media hits in the national media. And I said, it does not matter what's happening in the national media. You should see what's happening on the ground with people. They are talking to everyone. You know, everyone was having those conversations, those really respectful conversations with people that trusted them. And that was the power. So we will continue. What we want to do, and I'd love to chat to the others today, is how we really, in a strong way, continue that dialogue and that listening. And that will be a very big focus for us, continuing that communication with our community going forward. And the other thing I'll say, what's the power of a community independent? It just, you know, life isn't a dichotomy. It isn't one way or another way. There's always a spectrum of opinion. And so I think that the community independents are able to feed into that spectrum of opinions and debate. And we've also seen over the last number of years with you, Cathy and Helen and Zali and others, that we really can play a very vital role in leading the national discussion and the national debate. And things might not happen straight away, but it's just growing that discussion and growing an idea. So I would use it as an example, the Integrity Commission that, you know, both you and Helen Hayes were working
We'll pick up that in a minute, because I'm really keen to have that conversation about, you know, how do we actually get action on that. So that's lovely, really a nice sense of it. And as you're talking, that's what happened to me. It was that sense of that sense of you knew, and I know all of you talking about it, but you knew something was happening on the ground, because people started turning up, and as Zoe just said, like 1,500 people turning up on the beach, like something's going on here, like it's bigger than us. So it just seems like that's a really common theme. So Monique, let's hear about Kylea.
Good morning.
I've heard on the grapevine that Josh is really, really upset still about Kylea. So
thoughts and prayers.
We want to talk about him. I don't want to talk about him. I actually want to talk about you and your electorate. And what does community mean from your perspective?
Thanks, Cathy. So yes, I should acknowledge that I'm sitting on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, but something that's also been considered the traditional lands of the Australian Liberal Party. So one of the challenges of Kylea is the fact that it is a Conservative seat that has been held by the Conservative politicians for the last 122 years. As everyone else has said, you know, there's no seat is completely homogeneous. And I think one of the things that really became apparent to us in Kylea in the last 8 months was the fact that, yes, there's lots of wealthy people in this electorate who are well educated and, you know, living reasonably comfortable lives, but there's also 19% Chinese Australian population that were being marginalised by the previous government as a political ploy, and who felt really poorly treated, particularly in the last few years during the COVID pandemic. Then we had the largest population of 18 to 25-year-old voters in any electorate in Victoria. And the government wasn't speaking to them, wasn't talking to their concerns. And when we spoke to them, their concerns were pretty clear, and they weren't being listened to or addressed by the previous government. And so I think, you know, one of the virtues of a community campaign and speaking to people and hearing their voices is the ability to appreciate granularity of who's in your electorate, that the parties don't necessarily address. So you can specifically talk to specific groups and find out what matters to them. And, you know, obviously it varies from group to group, but you know, you're not just speaking on the major party points that are being pushed out in every other electorate around Australia. And that's one of the beauties of the community movement, is the ability for people to be conscious of and reactive to concerns that are individual to their electorate. So I came to this, as many people would know, by answering an ad in the paper. I hadn't been previously involved in the community movement, but like many, many people in Kooyong, I just felt a rising sense of visceral frustration with the Morrison government. But before that, you know, with Tony Abbott and even Malcolm Turnbull and their failure, the failures of the last 9 or 10 years. And I think it just got to a tipping point. In Kooyong, what happened was that, you know, a small group of people, as in so many other communities, got together and started it. And there are lots of pieces to that thing being started, but one of them, one of the most important ones, was the fact that we knew it was possible. Why did we know it's possible? Because it had been done before. Firstly in Indi, with the community movement in Indi, and then, you know, in the 2019 in Warringah. And you look at that, and it does give you a sense of we could do this too. I was extremely fortunate that the people who came to the campaign early were very skilled, very, very smart people. You know, I made the joke in my first speech that, you know, all of the women of Kooyong we have an above average number of women, proportion of women in the electorate, and all of them were above average women. But it was true, you know, it was an extraordinary group of people. And, you know, early on when they picked me and we had that very first launch that Cathy was so kind, you know, to come to, you know, I looked around the room, I thought, hang on, where did these 700, 800 people come from? You know, it was incredible how quickly it came. And, you know, the ability for support from the community to coalesce as quickly and effectively as it did was, to me, shocking. Actually, the fact that we had, you know, 800, 900, 1,000, and then the number of volunteers just kept going up, and then by election day, you know, 2,500 people out there on the streets. It just reflected the degree of incredible frustration from people, but also the trick was to get them in and then keep them, and we kept them because they were getting something out of it. They were meeting people, they were making friends, they were feeling that what they was doing was worthwhile, they were having fun, and they could see that we were making progress. And for me, one of the major challenges of the next 3 years will be keeping people, keeping them engaged, keeping the community engagement going, because I'm sure we're going to speak to this, but there's a real, not a tension, but, you know, the challenge of dealing with your local issues within the electorate, and then going to Canberra for something that feels very different, but still is going to reflect the concerns of the electorate. Yeah. That will be one of the major challenges, I think, for me, especially, you know, with the staffing that we have, trying to cover everyone's expectations and meet everyone's wishes is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that's lovely. And really, you are opening up that whole discussion about how do we do the next step. So, Kate, hello from Western Australia, where you got up early. Welcome, and it's fantastic to have you here, and very, very keen to hear your thoughts on this topic. The member for Curtin.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I'm actually still in Canberra because I'm
even better.
Still, having missed the second week of Parliament, which was a bit depressing, but very pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about my origin story, but then largely focus on how I see the job, you know, going forward as a community independent. I had the shortest of the campaigns, and we launched with under 4 months. And the largest of margins with 14.9% margin. And I was the only one running against another female candidate. So, my big question is, how the hell did we actually do this? And when I think about that, I remember a Gary Larson cartoon from probably the 80s, which was a picture of 2 mosquitoes on someone's skin, and one of them had its proboscis stuck in, and it was about to explode, and the other one was saying, pull out, you've hit an artery. And that really sums up for me what I think happened in my community, is that we scratched the surface and we hit an artery of desire for optimism and a desire for values alignment between the representative and the community. And I'm very much a product of my community. I've spent almost all my life there and have a long family history there as well. And really, I suppose that it was, I just discovered through the community group that I wasn't the only one feeling this way. So when I was asked to do it, it seemed like something that was needed to be done. It's an honour and a huge responsibility to be a community independent. And I think in some ways it is a bigger responsibility than it is to run with a party, because it is all on you and it is all up to you to be ensuring that you are listening to your community and delivering on their expectations. For me, it's all really about that accountability and acting in a way that's consistent with your conscience, but also consistent with your community's views. And that's going to be difficult because there isn't ever only one community view. Thinking about going forward, I think there are 4 aspects of the job as a community independent, and some are the same and some are different to if you're in a party. The first part is being present and accessible and ensuring that you are visible in the community. And again, I think that's probably more important than if you're in a party, because there is a high degree of trust involved in people picking someone to represent them, where you don't have the shorthand of what the party stands for. So that aspect's really important. Another part is helping individuals, and that's probably always been an expectation in an electorate office, but that's still a really important part to provide that support and be an ally in the federal government system. The third part I'm really excited about, and that is providing channels for people to participate in democracy. And at the moment, I'm spending a lot of time understanding what all the parliamentary tools are that are available at our disposal. And some of those are really obvious, like 3-minute constituent statements and opportunities to make speeches. Others are less obvious, making submissions to inquiries, one-on-one meetings. Sometimes you get things done better actually behind the scenes than by making a big song and dance about it. And there's such an exciting opportunity to enable the community to actually use and access those tools. So rather than it all being about me, saying, here are some things that you can do if you care about this issue, and I can facilitate you doing those things to build that relationship between people in the community and their democracy, and actually make it feel like it's our democracy. So that's about understanding how things actually change in a democracy. I am one voice in 151. We've got to be realistic about that, but there are these tools at our disposal. And then the fourth part is the role in Parliament, and that is being a parliamentarian. And I think it's really important to bring some naivety to that, and also an optimistic sense of faith in the system to be able to deliver. And there'll be lots of allegations of us being powerless because we don't hold the balance of power, but we can just nudge things. We can change the culture. We can behave the way we think everyone else should behave. And it's only through that optimistic and idealistic and hopeful approach that we have any chance of ensuring that our Parliament actually represents our communities. So that's how I'm thinking about the job going forward. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be in this role and very grateful to my community for giving me that opportunity.
So isn't that just a sense of optimism and joy and delight that you've all brought to this? So the next conversation I want to have with you is one that says to me, and you've been talking about how it was you got elected. Many of you talk about the gap, the problem in the system of not being represented, not being listened to, poor voting behaviour. And you were able to, as you were, access that artery of dissatisfaction, and at the same time be incredibly well organised so you could make it work. So the next part of the conversation is looking for your thoughts and ideas, and we'll go through the same order of and I know all of you ran positive campaigns, so that idea of listening as the answer to not being represented. So I'm really interested in your thoughts about where there's been a gap, which clearly we have had in Australia, on such a serious, not only policy, but representation, vision. You know, there's been a huge vacuum. And your community is saying, all of your communities are saying, we want more, something. And you're saying, yes, I'm up for it. And none of you are saying, yes, I'm the absolute answer to the problem. You're saying there's a process that we could bring, and Kate, you articulated it beautifully, but others did too. The process of listening, of engaging, will get us a better outcome, is sort of what you're talking about. Now, in my head, I call that a compact. And I think your community's totally understood that you weren't the absolute answer to all the problems in Australia. They hoped you'd vote as you did on climate. They hoped you would do what you did on that matter of public importance. And can I just say, just a little ad here to those watching, if you haven't worked out that Parliament has a fantastic webpage. It's called aph.gov.au. And if you go there, you can live stream the speeches. And I was doing that on Tuesday. And then the speaker announced that we've got the MPI, matter of public importance. It comes up every day after question time on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. And usually the opposition just goes into boringness about how bad the government is. Anyhow, the speaker gets up and he said, we've had two requests for MPIs today. And he says, I'm going to make the decision. And I listened and I thought, oh yeah, I'll bet he'd go with the opposition. And he said, no, the MPI today is about Australia's failure to treat our refugee population with some degree of respect. And I nearly fell over in my kitchen. And then one after another, these magnificent women got up and made these superb speeches. Now, it wasn't even a nudge. It was that sense of, what you got elected to do, was be a voice on other stuff. So enough from me. What I'm really interested is how you're thinking of the process of being for your electorate what they're asking, when then they often don't know what the outcome is that they want, but they want a different way of being for your community. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on it. And again, I reckon 5 minutes each, and we'll go through the loop, and then we can just have a bit of a discussion about what comes out of that. So Allegra, do you want to set the ball rolling on this one? What's your compact with your community?
Look, my compact with my community is, again, what you said and what I've said in various speeches is, like, I know I will take missteps. I know I will sometimes not do the right thing. And I think my community is there to hold me to account. And that's the thing about my community. Even volunteers have come to me and said, look, I'm not, why don't you have this? Why don't you have that? That's actually me going, it makes me think and makes me react to what my community wants. And where I see it is, I think, being reactive and proactive, because I think with your community, to Kate's point, you need to react to what is important with the community at the time, and that's at the individual level, and that is at what a community specific group wants. And then it's about being proactive in your engagement and proactive in the work that you do in the community. What I mentioned before, I was very lucky to come from Wentworth, which has Voices of Wentworth, which is non-partisan, but has already built a community around engaging. And so I'm going to be listening to what they've done and as I said, I'm going to experiment on how to best engage with the community. So what we've got in mind so far is, first, certainly when there are key pieces of legislation coming up, having a dialogue with the community, and hopefully quite a timely dialogue with the community about that. And, we did that on climate. We had a Instagram live, I think it was late last week, once the legislation was actually visible, so that we could actually talk to the community about what were the issues and their reflections on the bill to date. Then I think it's about, I'm going to try and be very clear in terms of why I'm voting on what. I'm taking a leaf out of Zali's book and we'll be trying to promote what is coming up in Parliament, so that if people do have views on what's important in a particular bill, they can come to me about it. But lastly, getting out there in the community and talking to them about what's going on at the national level, and also how that affects local. So we're doing a town hall, sort of politics in the pub type thing the week after next, I think it is, where it's just going to be back, getting almost like when I was being elected, just there, but to have more discussion about what's going on right now in the community, and how does that feed back from a national point of view, but how does it feed on locally? There are some key issues that are important to Wentworth, such as public education, youth mental health, and local environmental action, that I believe that we as a community can actually action. And that's me helping to enable the community rather than me being the person who does everything, because that's what I can do, is actually be a catalyst, or be sometimes provide a bit of structure or focus around, or at least certainly my support. But what I realize is that a community of 140,000 people is much more powerful than one MP. And so if I can help unlock that community and help focus that organisation of the community, then we as a community can achieve very important things at that local level, as well as at the national level. And finally, I'm a bit gutted to go first on this, because I wanted to listen to all the other good ideas from around this room and see what you're all doing. But I'm very glad to hear them, because I know that this is going to be an iteration. I've taken my leaf out of your book, Cathy, on what you've done, and I thought, oh, we could do that, or what Zali's done, and that's what I think I'm going to do, is try and listen to all the best of what happens across the country, and also listen to all the wonderful volunteers in Wentworth, how they want to see it done.
And we'll pick it up again in the chat, because there's been a whole lot of yesterday and on Friday night, just huge discussion about how people want to be engaged. So I love that. I personally love that reflection of, there's 140,000 of you in the facilitation role. But Zoe, what do you reckon? You bring a whole lot of different background skills to this job, your communication and your worldly knowledge. How do you think about that compact you have?
Well, I think there's a few pieces to it, actually, and I think that there's sort of a macro piece, or a sort of large scale community piece, and then there's like a more direct interaction element. So certainly what I hope to do and plan to do is to try to continue doing the kinds of things that I was doing during the campaign. So having street meets, where basically on a Saturday morning people can just come and chat with me on one of the shopping strips about their priorities and issues, or the politics in the pub kind of thing that Allegra was talking about, but also building that out into, for example, taking some tips from you, Cathy, community panels, like an advisory group, which I'll put out expressions of interest for, so that I might have a group of a dozen people who are on that panel for 12 months, and then we rotate it. But also within my policy development during the campaign, I built some sort of expert groups in different policy areas, so that I have reference groups that I can go back to give me expert advice on particular issues. So certainly, even over the last few weeks, as we've seen what the government's priorities were going to be in regard to legislation, I've been able to be on the phone to people who are aged care providers, for example, or people who have a particular issue with the likes of the NDIS and such, to actually test the legislation through individuals within the electorate. So that's really quite directed. I think, it's to do with how, as I think Mon said, how you have that Canberra piece running and your community piece running. But again, the thing that really sort of struck me, having spent those 2 weeks in Parliament, is that the key to this is to make those things intersect, so that it is two-way all the time, that they shouldn't be separated. It has to be in and of the community, putting that forward in Canberra, bringing that back to community, testing that through community. So it's like a circular process. There's not separation. But the final thing too that I'd say, Cathy, is that one thing that really I realised after this couple of weeks in Parliament, it was there's this, it's almost like an intimidation thing of, oh, can we do that? Or I don't know how to do that. And I think what happened in that fortnight was we just did stuff, and we kind of didn't really know what we were doing, like we were winging it. And obviously we've got, people there, thankfully, like Zali and Helen and Rebecca Sharkey and others who are giving great advice and being very supportive of that process. But something like that MPI on refugees, I mean, it was literally just that morning, should we do something on refugees? And then we went, yes, let's do it. And we all sort of scrambled to do what, as you said, was actually quite an unusual thing, but we don't know it's an unusual thing. So we can just kind of do stuff that we think is important to do, because, and sort of try it, like float the boat out and see, you know, if it works. So it's like a, it's not radical, but it's just the freshness of it, because we're not constrained by what we think it should be, or something that we've learned through being career politicians or coming up as staffers. We just kind of come in and do it really directly. And I think there was that realization of, you can just get stuff done if you just get in there and have the conversation and push the case and make it happen.
That's how it felt, and it came across like just how you want your country to be. Okay, let's go to you, Kylea. What's your compact with your community, and how do you think you're going to do it?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, I'm trying to work out how to add to these incredible pieces of commentary rather than repeat. And so perhaps one of the things I'd encourage everyone who's listening today is to recognise that because we are of the community, many of the things that we will seek to do and are already doing are probably do mirror each other, not because we're a party and not because we're already copying each other, but because that's how community movements are built. So, you know, the feeling I have with my community is actually it's a compact that is about mutuality. And I guess I do want to focus in on that bit, because for everyone sitting on this conference, getting your candidate to Canberra is really only the first part of what we've set about to achieve. And in fact, I think it is essential to understand that the community's participation in democracy does not end with your candidate getting to Canberra. And again, you know, from my perspective, we had an incredible campaign, lots of community conversations, small meetings, large meetings, summits, social media, surveys, newsletters, and all that stuff is going to continue. And one of the things I particularly appreciated specifically around the climate legislation is once we had it tabled, I did a community survey out online and, you know, said to people, do you want me to back this legislation? What do you think about it? What would you like to see changed? And took comfort in the fact that 97% of people that responded to that survey came back and said, yes, get it through. It's a start, you know. So I knew I was moving in the way that my community wanted me to move. But I want to kind of pause here, because I think there's been a lot of talk about how as parliamentarians we've had staff taken away from us when it comes to our parliamentary function, and there is no doubt that makes it harder for us on a day-to-day basis. But I've got to say, I think it's a decision the government will live to regret, because what it meant is when I needed input on the climate bill, I just didn't turn to my singular policy person. I went out to the Climate Council, the Australian Conservation Foundation, my community, and all of a sudden, whereas, you know, I may have in the past had just one policy person ferreting, I had a group of about 25 people giving me input into how to make that bill better. So the compact I have with my community is a mutual one. You know, I recognise that I am accountable and being held responsible by my community to get the things done, but equally, I expect of my community that they turn up and that they let me hear their voice and they don't just sit back waiting for me to reach in all the time. And I think that that's, you know, it's like any new relationship, yeah? Like you need to try different things. And I think as Allegra said beautifully, I know I'm not going to get everything right, but by the same token, and I think that's what's great in the relationship I have with my community at the moment, is when I don't get it right, I expect my community to be understanding of that and work with me to get it right the next time. Because I think that's where politics has kind of gone off the rails at the moment is, you know, we're all only human. And I think fundamentally in politics, politicians have had a real problem saying, I'm sorry, I got that wrong, but I'll do better next time. I think for us being emissaries of our community, that actually enables us to bring that humanity and that authenticity into politics. So I guess that's, you know, that's how I see myself doing what my community wants me to do faithfully.
Yeah, that's lovely. I'm just going to do two things to value add to it. I remember being in Parliament and not knowing how to vote, like it was between two horrible choices. None of this is working. I said to Andrew Wilkie, what do I do? And he said, doesn't matter. As long as when you get out, you've got a good story for what you did. So I thought, okay, so what are you going to say? And he said X, Y, Z. And I said, oh, that'll be perfect. So I came out, Twitter was full of whatever it was. And I said, and here's blah, 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 blah. And people went, oh, fantastic. You've got good logic to what you did it. So they didn't actually want to agree with me. It wasn't that. It was just that they'd that word of trust. They'd entrusted me in a difficult circumstance to do what I thought was best. And I did it. And I could say why it was. So I learned that was a really important thing. As long as I had a good story for why I'd done it, the community would go with it. And then if people wanted to argue with me, I'd say, oh yeah, that's really good. What would you like me to have done? And would you work with me on it next time? And people go, no, you go and do that job. I don't want to have an opinion. Okay, so now, Sophie, you'll go next. But before we do, we had a really good story yesterday from one of your supporters about the work, that, a bit like what Kylie's just been talking about, but you must have done a survey last week on, was it bulk billing? So, someone was telling us a little bit about the engagement that you're already doing it. But anyhow, you tell us how you're thinking about your compact with your community and how you're going to, deliver that for us.
Well, similarly to the others, very much want to add to what they've already said and about how it's maintaining the dialogue, it's communication both ways, which is really important. So people do understand, like you were saying, Cathy, as to why you voted a particular way so they can understand it. And that communication is really important. What Kylie said about leaning on the community, I actually think it's probably a positive as well in some ways that we don't have as many staff, because it means that we will need to lean on the community. And I know the community is desperate to be involved. So I think that's a real positive. People want to get involved in their areas of interest in particular. So I think that's really exciting. The other thing I would say is I really want to be able to remain approachable. I think it's really important that we remain a part of our communities, a fundamental part of our communities, that we're not above our communities, that we are embedded within our communities. And that very much was what came through when we were doing the Voices things. When we asked people what type of representative do you want, they wanted somebody who was from the community and who would, remain a part of the community. So that to me is something that I want to do. And as the others have said, it'll be a game, I think we need to ask the people who are in our communities how they want us to engage with them, what they find the best way. So we have lots of ideas as well. We're talking about politics in the pub, street meets. We've got this idea of, politics in the park or surgeries like they do in England. So people can come and chat. We just sort of keep it approachable from all ages, from the kids. And I mean toddlers. I want them to find their politician approachable, someone that they can come and give a hug to if they want to, right through to everyone. And young people and teens, I want them all to know that they can come and talk to me. It is like being a GP. You do need to be approachable as a GP. So we will, listen to the community as well about how they would like to do that. And we did do some funny things during the campaign as well, like surfing with Sophie, so that you're in a different group. I mean, I'm a hopeless surfer. So I said, don't worry about being able to surf, just come along. And then we also had the concert for young people because we wanted to be in their space and reach out to their space as well. So I think, that's important. They're the main things to add, I think. But also just adding on that other, just how we function in Parliament, that naivety that Kate and I think Zoe talked about, which I love. We're not quite sure, but this is what we think we should be doing. This is what we want to do in our hearts. And what we know our community wants us to do. We don't know whether it's within the rules, but let's just hop up and do it anyway. It's good fun.
Well, you're not going to get into trouble, are you? Because you're independent. There's no party that's going to say, like you get to make your own rules up. And as long as your community is your boss. Okay, Dr. Monique. And on behalf of everybody, we just love that comment about telling the people to put on their masks. Thank you very much. So that wasn't your compact with your community, but it was one of the things that we Australians were so pleased you did. But tell us about what you see as your compact with your community. I think you might be on mute, Monique.
Sorry,
Turn your mic on, Monique. Would you turn your mic on?
No, you're on mute. You're on mute. God. Look, I have to point out that in terms of, you know, this whole we're all going to make errors thing, I just got it out of the way early.
Did. Yeah.
And, you know, made a stupid error this week in Parliament during one of the votes on the climate change bill. And basically, I won't even say I went the wrong way. It's a long story, but I basically missed the vote, which meant that in the end, I sat on the side that was voting for new coal and gas projects, and then had to fess up to that, which of course was to the glee of many people, and attracted a bit of, you know, what you'd expect on Sky News and things like that. But, you know, it was a mistake. What can you do? You have to own these things. Look, I think, you know, what I suppose, you know, what I did was I said, look, I made a mistake. I buggered it up. I made an idiot of myself. I'm embarrassed. It didn't change any outcomes or anything like that, but, you know, it wasn't a great thing to do. And, you know, to do that, I think is one of the things, you know, accountability is very important. So I sort of said, look, I made a mistake, didn't change anything, but, you know, I won't do it again, sort of thing. Accountability and transparency is really important. You know, one of the things we've had from the last government is lack of both of those things. And people respond well to it and to honesty. And, you know, that's not the first mistake I've made since I was elected, and I'm sure I'll make others. But people do seem to, even the media, I've found, you know, when they say, well, why did you do that? And I say, well, you know, in retrospect, I probably wouldn't have done it quite that way again. And next time, you know, I've learned from that mistake. You know, the reality is I am a rookie. And I've made a few rookie errors just in the last couple of months, even since the election. People are forgiving of that if you own it. People don't like people not admitting their errors. I thought, you know, on the front page of The Age today, there was a thing about the Andrews government not admitting that some of the ways they handled border closures with COVID were problematic, and people saying, look, I just wish they'd say that they acknowledge that they've done a mistake and they wish they'd done it differently. And that's something that I will always do, you know, when I do bugger things up, which will no doubt happen quite often. I think one of the other thing that we can offer our communities that the big parties and representatives of other parties can't is just the ability to scramble. You know, that thing that we did this week with the MPI, you know, where we basically said, oh, sure, we'll talk about that. Great. Well, okay, we'll do that this afternoon. And then we just did it. You know, a backbencher from the Liberal Party or the Labor Party would never have that opportunity and never have that fun. And it turned out, you know, it went from nothing first thing in the morning to something that we did, and we all walked away from it. And I think the people from the government who participated in it as well, we all walked away from it. I thought that was really powerful. We all learned from it. It meant a lot to the communities that we did that. It was a really, really good thing to do, but it was something that someone from a major party wouldn't have had that ability to engage with. And that's one of the beauties of being an independent. In my campaign in the last week, on the Thursday before the election, you know, we decided to mount a federal court challenge to people regarding people who've been disenfranchised around COVID and things like that. And the fact that we could get that going and do it in the space of 4 hours actually was incredible. But you could never do that if you're a part of a major party. And that's one of the fun things about being an independent and having a community behind you and all the various peoples that you can pick up the phone and do something is that we can see an opportunity and then grab it. Mm-hmm. And they're going to come up. And for us, one of the challenges is going to be the amount of information that's coming to us and the number of people coming to us. Do you know about this? You need to know about this. You need to think about this. You need to act on that. And it's just seeing the 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 things, which is a real goer, where A, it's important, and B, we can have an impact somehow. And then show to our communities that's one of the ways that we can be impactful. The feeding back to the community and getting the community stuff, I don't agree that having fewer staff is a good thing. I think I'm really struggling on, you know, I would love to all these pieces of legislation that we had in the last fortnight, 18 pieces of legislation. It would have been great to have an online forum and say to everyone, what do you think about this one? Have you got concerns about this one? Who's read this? What do you reckon? We just didn't have time. So
Can
the
Cathy-
time is a challenge.
Cathy, can I just jump in there really quickly? Because I just want to pick up on something that Mon just said. And I think it's actually the overarching theme of the power that you have from an independent on the crossbench is your capacity to speak to any topic you wish to speak to at any point in time. And I just wanted to kind of share that MPI came off. It was Allegra. We got the, in the morning we were told, look, you might be able to have this MPI. We'd all met with people from across the asylum seeking community in that week. And it was Allegra who said, should we do something on this? And we all grabbed it and ran. To close the loop, someone from the Labor Party came up to me after that and said, with full face of honest sincerity, that is the first real debate we've had in this house in a decade. I cannot believe what you guys just achieved. And it's like, that's what question time should be all the time. So, I just wanted to throw that in over the top of that, because I think that came from our communities and the people we'd met with, and, and members of parties can't have those conversations because if it's not part of their party doctrine, they cannot stand up and deliver that message.
Well, let me just do a call out on that. So what you're talking about is flexibility and agility. And I just want to, on that note, just reflect on what Zoe and who else was it? Was it you, Sophie, when the whole thing about the superannuation change came through? So again, I listen, as I say, I'm listening, and Zoe stands up and she said, "Oh, I've got a conflict of interest." I nearly fell off my chair. I have never heard, like in all the 6 years I was there, and I've never heard any member of parliament claim a conflict of interest. And when it was just superb. So I text Zoe and say, "Good woman, well done." And she said, "It felt like the right thing to do." And I think, yeah, like what an unusual thing to do. But what I really want to say about it is that almost every single piece of legislation that comes into parliament must have there must be people in that parliament for whom they've got a conflict. And I can remember when I first got there saying, well, how do we handle this? And they said, oh, we don't. We've got there's something about being a member of parliament where you don't have to own up for your conflict of interest. And I said, but it's so fundamentally relevant. So again, it's what you're talking about, the flexibility of the job, but also it's bringing your values to the place and just doing it because you think it's right. And you don't know, it's never been done before because you just did it. It was just like, oh my God. And I know there was huge conversation on Twitter afterwards, just saying, thank you. Let's have more of this. Okay, let's hear from you, Kate. And then we've got to move on to the national implications of what it is we've done here.
Okay, just to finish that out, I think my compact with my community is to listen, enable, act and report in that role. The listening and enabling are the bits where I think there are the most interesting opportunities to do things differently. And really it's about experimenting. And at the moment, my team are grappling with how we find the right balance in those experiments. So how do we balance consulting experts versus consulting citizens on issues? Do we tap into people's views proactively or reactively? So is it, if there's a bit of legislation coming up, then we'll have a town hall, or do we actually want groups around issues to be acting proactively? And the other thing that we're balancing is how ambitious or pragmatic should we be in those discussions? Do we want to rethink the welfare system or propose an amendment to this particular piece of legislation that might actually get up? I'm drawing on my most recent experience, which was in the non-profit sector. I was running an innovation team there that used human-centred design as a way of tapping into user experience to improve the design of services. And I think there are a lot of parallels there with that methodology to how do you actually tap into the experience of a large group of people and condense that into something that's usable and realistic. And we'll continue to experiment with that. We had an Integrity Commission discussion in my community a few weeks ago, which I then summarised and sent to the Attorney General, which with input on not only some aspects of the Corruption Commission, but also the sorts of language that might need to be used in communicating that, or common misunderstandings about it that would help the government to actually explain what it's doing. There are opportunities to use technology better. we'll explore those, and then also just open-ended discussions. So I think there'll be lots of different methods, and we'll end up with a library of different engagement approaches that are appropriate for different situations and issues. Two big challenges. The first for me is accessing the 49% of the electorate who did not support me, who I'm also representing. And obviously you can try and build up your email list and your contact list, but that's one challenge. The other challenge that I haven't faced yet is, what if the majority of my community has a view that's different to what my conscience is telling me to do? I don't know how I'll respond in that situation. But I think the message to the electorate really, and part of that compact, is if you want to be represented, you need to turn up. You need to tell me what you think. You need to own your role in our democracy and communicate it. And you won't always get your way, but if you want your view to be taken into account, you've got to be present.
Yeah, great. So I recommend Peter Andren's book. He was a member for Kylea for three terms and an independent. And he tells that fantastic story of his how he managed that in terms of his electorate. So there's some really good reading there. Okay, I'm loving this, can I say? And the comments from everybody, it's such a rich conversation. So when I was researching today and asking people what they wanted to hear from you, so many people, they wanted to know what it meant, which we've covered about your community, but they want to talk about the nation. They want to talk about Australia. They want to talk about this country that we love, that's got so much potential and is not nearly reaching it because of all those reasons why you got elected. So the next part of the conversation is, and in no particular order, you can just jump in whenever you want to, is that what will success look like for Australia if you can do what you want to do? And individually within your electorates and collectively. And I'm sort of pushing it out a little bit because, and I'll say Helen Haynes is not here today, but, when Helen and I first talked about that baton change, I said, look, I've done what I set out to do. I've done my 6 years. I've kept the seat safe, and we've demonstrated what we wanted to do. And Helen said, well, that's not enough for me. I really want to nudge the whole jolly system. We've got to actually make structural change. And I said, well, good on you, Helen, go to it. And I had no belief that she could do what she's done with integrity. The fact that she could make it an election issue was beyond anything I could have imagined. But so I just want to put it out there, like people listening today, imagine if it all goes as you want it to go, you as individuals, what would success look like when we come back in, I'm going to say, at least 2 terms, and you've done what you've done, and the world's a different place because you've been able to do it. So, hop in and have a bit of a chat about it. No particular order. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah, go, Sophie.
Look, there's so many things, isn't there? One, I think just generally having a bit more compassion in all of the policies that we in the way that Australia does politics. But I'll say one thing, and that is definitely that we are a country that is starting to lead the world on climate action, and that we are leaders, and that we are supporting our Pacific neighbours, and we're not treating them in a patronising way, but that we are, like you said, utilising that potential and that talent that we have in this country to be so much more than what we currently are. And hopefully after, a number of terms, we are well on that way to achieving that. And that what I want is, one thing we realised is that the young people in our electorate, in our country, do not have the same sense of pride that we did when we were growing up. We were so proud of Australia and our country, and I think that a lot of young people have not experienced that. So I think success would be that restoration of pride in our country and where we're headed and how we're leading the world on certain things, and that level of compassion as well. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I just want to respond on that, because in my electorate too, that absolutely the young people was a priority. And I still constantly get amazed that we never did big, we did lots, but it was never huge. But the impact small engagement processes had on the young people who I run into now, and they're big, and they're saying, remember when? And I go, no, not really, tell me more. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And it just, the power of the impact of that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Allegra, you tell me, what would it look like for you?
Look, there are lots of different versions of it. I think something I said was difference, not division. And I actually think that I always said about Parliament that I wanted my kids to be able to look at it and with pride, rather than going, I don't want you to behave like that. Please don't do like that. Don't speak like that at home. So I think this idea that we can have complex conversations in this country in a way where we have different opinions, but it's not ending up in a divided approach. And I think that is partly how you engage with the community on difference and on, and on different values and on different priorities, but it's also how the Parliament behaves. And I think, that MPI this week, that I think there's a germination for me, a little seed of how I think the crossbench could really lead a bit of a revolution in Parliament by and in having complex conversations on difficult topics in a way that, as you say, we can be proud of ourselves rather than feel that this has actually pushed us further apart, where we can learn from each other rather than, than shout at each other. And so that applies to climate, it applies to housing, it applies to the economy, it applies to integrity. These are big, difficult issues, but can we engage with each other in a more respectful and truly curious way? Big ask.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Kate?
I'm not on mute. There are obviously a lot of policy issues that could define what success looks like, but for me, it's much more process driven. So it is, I think success, we have an impact on improving how Parliament operates so that it is actually used to develop better legislation. And that's part of rebuilding faith in our democracy. And there being a sense of optimism and pride in our democratic system. So the policy outcomes, I think, are part of that as well. But the thing that community independents bring that the parties have failed to deliver is that sense that there is a way to modernize democracy and make it fit for purpose with today's challenges.
Oh. Democracy fit for purpose. Gosh, that would be so nice. Okay, do you want to have a go, Mon or Zoe?
Yeah, sure. I have to say, and not on a selfish level, I think that for me, part of the markers of success are, yes, action on climate change, and we're beginning to get there. Yes, an integrity commission, we're going to get that. I think it's going to be good. Action on gender, and for me, action on the things I feel really strongly about, which is healthcare reform and NDIS and things like that. But I also think that for me, if I don't get re-elected in 3 years, that will be a problem. Not on a selfish level, but because I think that what you did in Indi, Cathy, is demonstrating that that's the perfect model, that you had a successful transition. And so if I don't get re-elected, I can go back and do my life, but it would mean that the community hasn't been happy with the independent person who's represented them for the 3 years, that essentially that it's a failed experiment. And so for me, I think that's actually a big responsibility, is to demonstrate that it is a worthwhile thing to do, that we will make a difference. We made the point in the press conference this morning on Thursday about the climate change actors that, if Kylea was still represented by a Liberal, then they would have been represented by someone who would have effectively disenfranchised them in that debate, because the Liberals disengaged from the climate change thing and they didn't speak to it or engage with it. We had a situation where the National Party voted against Helen's motion that rural concerns and had to be taken into account in any action on climate change. I mean, it's inexplicable. But the Liberal Party are doing the same thing. They're saying, we're not going to engage with this, we're taking you away. So I think our challenge is to say, look, yes, we didn't have a balance of power, but we made a difference. And, we improved that bill and everything that comes up to continue that and continue to demonstrate that effectiveness, so that the community gets its, and these are the 47% of people who didn't vote for me, gets their head around it. And in 3 years' time say, well, actually, I wasn't keen, but she did do this, and this. The independent works. It is a worthwhile thing. And, whether it's me or someone else gets elected as the independent for Kylea in 3 years, I actually feel really strongly I don't want it to go back into being, a Liberal seat. not for personal reasons, but because I do think that, you know, Kylea will do better if they're happy with an independent and they re-elect an independent.
Yeah, well, good. I'm very happy to. That's great. I like the logic of that. So, Kylie, I don't think, and Zoe, what do you think?
Yeah, Zoe, do you want to go, or you're happy for me to speak?
You go, Kylie. I'll go after you.
Okay. I think, you know, interestingly, I listen to the incredible people I get to sit on the crossbench with and reflect on what they said. I agree with much of what's been said. I think success will be judged on, and I guess that's, you know, we will be judged on multiple levels. We will be judged on what impact we have in terms of the legislation that comes through. All of us ran on faster action on climate, the establishment of an integrity commission, greater gender equity. You know, they were the things that we had in common, and I would expect that success for us will look like getting forward movement on those policy issues. But much to what I think, you know, hearing the others speak, to me, our biggest measure of success is whether we can have a long-term sustainable impact on the political system. Because when I look at all of us sitting here today, and I don't mean to speak for you guys, but none of us are here for what's in it just in the short term. Like, I know that. I trust these guys. Having the opportunity to work with them is extraordinary because they are bright, they are passionate, they are intelligent. And every single person that's on this call this morning is committed to leaving this country and our democracy a better place. So I think for me, the ultimate measure of success will actually be a more engaged democracy. You know, like, is young Australians understanding how our democracy works and what the opportunities are for them to participate in that democracy. I think of it as, I think our country went to sleep. I think for the last, you know, 25 years, probably since the 70s, which was the last time we saw large public discourse, people have kind of become immune and numb to politics. You know, you talk to people, they're either completely disengaged, they don't give a toss, they think politicians are all, excuse language, wankers. You know, they don't represent them, they've disengaged. I think my ultimate goal would be to see people actually take pride in our democracy, not just in our country, but pride in our democracy, and understand the power that every single voice has. You know, my vote is no more important than my son's vote. The Prime Minister's vote is no more important than my niece's vote. And that's the message people need to understand. And I think for me, it comes back to not just seeing that as a burden, but as an incredibly wonderful opportunity and responsibility. So to me, long-term success is a more engaged democratic process, and to know that I've in some way played a small role in bringing that about and reshaping. Oh, and I've got to say, personal, question time needs to change in Parliament. If we can change and bring that back to more like the debate we had around the matter of public importance, they're the conversations we need to be having in Parliament House. You know, constructive, respectful. I really love what I think it was Allegra that said, you know, recognise we can be different without having to be divisive. Power to you, Allegra.
Yeah. Zoe, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, for me, it's about restoration of trust. And without being idealistic, I think that's at the core of the disintegration of democracy the world over and the rise of authoritarianism in various countries. And this is something that I've seen. And that was one of the core reasons for me stepping in, because I think that's really dangerous. And I think it goes to a lot of what's been said by the others. If we can work towards that restoration of trust, we will be re-elected, or independents will be returned in the seats that we sit in. But also that we need to get to a position where we can make hard decisions that aren't necessarily going to be popular, but are the right decisions that need to be made for our country. And I think that in the last couple of decades, we've come to a point where populism rules. So difficult decisions don't get made because the major parties don't want to do that because they won't get re-elected. But then we end up with all sorts of structural problems. So I think if we go about rebuilding trust with reasoned decision-making, collaboration and pragmatism, even when things are difficult, then that goes some way to rebuilding trust in leadership. And that's really what we need in order to bring people back from the rabbit holes that they've gone down on conspiracies and such, which are causing all sorts of issues on various fronts currently, and will get worse if we don't re-inject honesty back into our political system and represent in a really authentic and empathetic way.
Oh, good luck. No, I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean, that's so important what you're talking about. So in wrapping the session up, the next session for this convention is we're going to be working in breakout groups when the 250 people who are on board now get to talk about with each other about what action they would like to take. So I thought I'd finish by asking each of you MPs if there's one thing that the people listening today could do and do really well, which would enable you to do your job. What would it be? You can have two if you need it. But what's the thing that you would like in the next session people to talk about? What action can people who care about these things take? And one thing that if people did really well would actually enable you collectively and democracy collectively to be more effective, to restore that trust. That's all without notice. Who wants to start on that one?
Oh, look, I started last. You go, Allegra. I started last time.
No, I'm happy. I was just going to say how to best engage with the people who didn't vote for you. Like, I think that's probably really crucial, is that how to truly engage the whole community in its diversity of opinions would be what I'd like. Sorry, I just had to get that one in.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Sophie, you want to go?
Yeah, so I just... Something I said throughout the campaign was that a strong democracy absolutely needs the participation of its people. So if there's one thing you can do, and you're doing it by being here, is actually just step in, lean in, get involved. Nothing's going to change unless you get involved. So please, yeah, that would be my one thing, is this democracy's got to work for you. So it's yours. You know?
Great. It's ours. Yeah.
Yep.
Can I build from that, Cathy? Because I actually think that clearly we've got an incredible group of people that are already motivated towards change on this call. And I think from my perspective, the question becomes, how do you activate the tiers of influence that exist around you? You know, and it was not lost on me on multiple occasions that if, you know, those people that had chosen to volunteer behind our campaign, a number of times we said to them, look, if you can go out and find 50 votes, this is a landslide, you know, like this is a landslide. So I think it is that, how do we encourage conversations that don't run into roadblocks or cul-de-sacs? Because my observation is that I think that's what happened a little bit around our campaign. We had bubbles that grew, and they were kind of like, Mon, you'd probably, or Sophie, you'd speak up about this better, but lobes off a lung. You know, you'd have this channel that'd go out, and then you'd end up in this cul-de-sac, and it just couldn't grow any bigger. So how do you continue to spread? Yeah, what are they called?
Alveolus.
Alveolus. She says as she just gesticulates across her chest. Anyway, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you not get stuck in a dead end? And I guess that's the same. How do you talk to the 49% of people who didn't vote this way and get them on board?
Yeah, great.
Can I add, and it's quite similar, but the thing that worries me is that we are speaking at cross purposes with people we disagree with. So making an effort to understand people who disagree with you and why, that's something I really want to work on. I think there's a real danger coming through a community movement like this, where you're surrounded by your supporters and everyone's all excited. It feels like that's the community and they're the opinions, but we're just falling into the same, you know, the same trap of being in our echo chambers. So engaging in conversation with people who have different views, trying to understand what drives those views rather than believing we are right and everyone else is wrong. I think that's a shift we need to see in the way we approach all the issues that we're dealing with. It's probably, it's a lot more subtle than, you know, get involved, which is really important too, but being open-minded other ways of thinking, I think it would make a huge difference to our ability to address some of the really complex problems that we face.
Yeah, Kate, during the election over here on the East Coast, we did a lot of what we call courageous conversations, which was about how to get our volunteers to listen. And I realised last night I went out to a group of people for dinner and I stopped doing it. I just started arguing about climate. And I was thinking after, I thought, oh God, I didn't handle that very well. I should have asked this person questions like, why do you, done the engaging. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good reminder. Yeah, Zoe and Mon have a...
Yeah, I'll just follow on from that. I really agree with Kate. And in fact, I mean, having spent 4 years in the US talking to Donald Trump supporters, a lot of what I have done in my career is talk to people who have very different positions to me. And I think it's a very powerful thing to do. And it does inform and reinform your own position. And it also, I think, as people who are legislating on behalf of a nation, you need to be able to see what the consequences or impact of that legislation will be on people who have a different perspective or a very different life to your own, and put yourself on the other side of the prism. The other thing I would say, and this sort of comes from a conversation that you and I had, Cathy, some time ago about problem solving within the electorate. So if there's a particular issue that a group or a constituent comes to you with that they want you to solve, and I think in your case it might have been trains or telecommunications or something like that, to be able to have that interaction with those members of the community along the lines of, well, how can you participate in resolving this problem, rather than expecting, us to be the problem solvers for every little thing. And I kind of used that during my campaign with some of my policy formulation, for example, where organisations within the electorate who are very passionate about particular issues like refugees, for example, I took them in to the extent that they helped me write the policy. And they were very informed on something that, I also have a passionate interest in, but it was a case of, well, let's work together on this. How do we want this to look? Rather than just sort of passing it over to the MP to try to fix it, to actually collaborate together in a structural and, functional way to make a difference.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So, and it's part of like when your MP puts out a call, pay attention to it. Don't be too busy to be or know somebody else who could, dob somebody else in, ring somebody else up and say, like, this is helping. It's your, that tier of, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. So to reaching out. So where are we at, Mon? I think.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. Yeah, I completely agree with what everyone else has said. I mean, the major problem is trying to get to people who didn't vote for me and have a constructive and respectful discussion. Clearly, in the last few years in Australia, many people have lost the ability to have a difference of opinions that doesn't then result in people getting upset or angry. I felt that many times during the election, people were just threatened by the fact that I was very different for what they expected and what they thought they were going to get and what they'd always had. And so they'd get angry. And I'd say to them, why does me doing this threaten you as much as it does? Because it clearly does. It makes you agitated and angry. The number of people who yelled at me because I was doing what I was doing was extraordinary. But those people, they might not have voted for me, but now I need them to tell me how I can represent them as well. And we've seen around COVID the fact that things get very febrile and very heated, and people get very upset, and they tend to get somewhat aggressive, and that's not what we want to do. I think that the challenge is taking the temperature down and having those constructive engagement with people. And it's hard because I feel sometimes like I'm just singing to the choir all the time. I put out a newsletter of what I've done in Canberra in the last 2 weeks, but it's just going to all the people on my volunteer list, or I really like it to go to the people who are saying on the socials, why isn't she in the city of in Hawthorne? Why haven't we seen her going for a ride? What's she up to? She's not doing anything. She's useless. She's lazy. She's overfed and overpaid. They're the people I need to actually be talking to. So I guess that's how we go out on the street and, you know, stand in the shopping centres and go back to what we did in the election, and maybe door knock, you know, keep door knocking for the next 3 years.
Cathy, I know we're right on time, but something else has just occurred to me, and I guess it's perhaps something for this group to chat. The other thing we've not talked about at all, but there is a very negative and hostile media environment in this country around people like us. And I've got to say, I was quite shocked during the campaign at the amount of negative reporting that came out, and even more so since I've gone to Canberra. The personal attacks are quite astounding. So I guess the other thing, the challenge is, how do you know, this is not just a political system we're trying to change. And to that point of who do we threaten, we're threatening an entire power structure at the moment. And how do we stand and face into that to say, no, that's not okay? You know, like editorials that just basically, you know, run you into the ground. That's not okay. So why are people still buying those papers and not actually being held back to account? So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think that is actually one of our other challenges in terms of, we're talking about long-term cultural systemic change here, but we have a media environment at the moment which is in many cases incredibly destructive and is very invested in division. You know, that's what they're trying to continue to create.
So, Kylea, just summarize that into an action. What can people do? What could they
work
do?
out how our community voice, which is fundamentally a person-to-person voice, can counter negative media coverage. Because those 49% of people who don't vote for us are still reading those publications when, you know, they don't know us and they speak badly of us, or me in particular. I'm nobody's darling.
And I know that's right. So I'm going to bring it to a close because we've got other work to do. So in saying thank you for your time, for your energy, for your courage, for standing up, and for already the 2 weeks of just absolutely magnificent work you've done, I'm wanting to just sort of bless you with our support and to say we are here for you, and we're probably going to need to be asked in a very specific way when you need this, like the general help, yes, but when you need it, don't hesitate to come to us. We're really good on the socials, but also personally, you know, because we want what you want. So I think there's 2 things I'll say in closing: is be bold in your requests of us. Be very bold, because when you asked us, when the community said, can we help get independents elected, the community said, you know, 20,000 people said, yep, we're going to do that. And, you know, the $20 million and all that sort of stuff. So there's no ask that's too big. There's no ask that's too big. So just, I think, remember that. And we want you to be re-elected more than you want to be re-elected. And we want you to be successful more than you could ever want to be successful. So it's really us as a team being there, us as a community of Australians being there for you. And we really do need, when you want the help, ask, you know, individually, your electorates, but also the wider movement.